I suppose there's that old place of my aunt's. Great Virginia's Folly, Benjamin sighed. I wish you wouldn't call it that. It implies she didn't know exactly what she was doing. I still maintain that the entire mix-up with the will was a calculated move, a final reckoning against the people who made her miserable when she was alive. Short of putting your hand in your pocket for a fistful of manna, I suppose we shall never know, the merchant prince snorted. If I had that much manna to spare, I'd not be wasting it on disturbing Auntie Effie. Can you imagine what she'd say if she knew she'd wasted however much manna that costs? Galstone finished his cereal and leant back in his chair. Oh, you know what the problem will be, with a certain ominous yet familiar tone. Oh, for goodness sake, Benjamin threw his half-eaten crumpet down in disgust. I'm just saying, it's in Regario. The Maester and Rags will all claim we're trying to put one over on them and steal the console for our own nefarious ends. Paragons preserve us, not everything is about putting one over on the Maestrans. Well, you know what they're like. Benjamin interrupted Galstone before he could elaborate on what Maestrans were like, slamming his palm down on the table with a loud crack that rattled all the breakfast crockery. The damn building is falling down. It's in a great place. It's got its own little dock, it's got oodles of space, and it's right there. Honestly, what do you expect me to do? Track down the mighty spirit Nagel, herald of Lashadar, and bribe him to build a magic floating consulate that hovers over the city equidistant between both banks? Galstone made placating gestures. I know, I'm just being non-constructive. He paused and frowned. I don't suppose we could suggest fitting it in at the Mint now, could we? That might work. Benjamin rolled his eyes. There's precious little room on the island as it is. Can you imagine Lizelotta's face if we suggest adding a consulate and a dozen staff? That ghastly statue of Il Volpe's practically tipped up the island and sunk the whole damn place in the Vassa. It's that overcrowded. What's next? Pontoons, bridges, building it underwater, a dual consulate with offices on either side of the river so you need a boat to go and check the files of the other city. No, bugger that. I'm going to suggest Virginia's place, and if any maestrans start complaining, I shall be very ironic at them until they shut up. Galstone grabbed a slice of toast and chewed it thoughtfully for a moment, turning the matter over in his head. You couldn't build it underwater anyway, he said at last, suppressing his smirk in the face of Benjamin's frustrated frown. Everybody knows. Orcs can't swim. While the people of Savos and Holberg are dealing with the curses that have shattered their mirrors and withered their gardens, and while the people of Temeshwar are making preparations for further attacks, the people of the twin cities of Mistra and Regario are dealing with their own pressing matters, building their prestige, arguing with their rivals, advancing their political agenda, protecting the good name of the League, and plotting against the thugs on the other side of the river. Things like that. Known as some of the most articulate and diplomatic people in the Empire, Tassartans delight in wordplay almost as much as they enjoy beating their rivals in a political manoeuvre. The twin cities remain fractious, but while the senator for Tassato is widely considered to have the worst seat in the Senate by most citizens of the League, even the citizens of Regario are forced to grudgingly accept Cesare Sanguineo Rezia di Tassato does an adequate job of representing the city. For a maestrin, obviously. Likewise, the maestrins are forced to concede that the Barosas, Natalia and Gabriel, appear to be doing an adequate job of leading the armies of the League. For Regarians, obviously. While the other cities appear troublesome or under siege, Tassato appears to be enjoying a period of relative peace and prosperity. For a given value of peace and prosperity, obviously. With that in mind, the citizens have turned their attention towards improving the status of the twin cities within the Empire by offering their uniquely Tassartan brand of diplomacy. A proposal has been made to construct an imperial consulate. During the spring solstice 383, the Senate voted to amend the powers of the imperial consul to make them a member of the Senate. It seems as if the position of consul has been controversial since its inception in the summer of 379, with questions asked about the remit of its authority and its purpose in the wider empire. For now, though, it seems that most people have accepted that the consul both deals with diplomatic incidents that do not involve the foreign nations the empire has appointed ambassadors to deal with, and serves as liaison between the diplomatic corps and the Senate. Yet it seems that the consul has always struggled to do their job. The great forest oaks and the oaks of the Mournwold alike have tended to ignore the consul. The Grendel preferred the company of the Imperial Fleet Master, and the Thule wanted to deal mostly with the Varushkins, even before they grudgingly agreed to embassies between Otkodov and the Empire. Even the Fenni seemed largely disinterested in the consul during the recent unpleasantness in Mournwold and Hanmark. The typical Tessartan loves politics of all kinds, and that includes international diplomacy. It is no coincidence that the Rigario dossier, the Empire's foremost espionage agency, is based in Tassato. Sadly, however, none of the Empire's foreign embassies were built within the city, something that rankles with the intrigue and politics-minded of citizens on both banks of the Vassa. There's the Yarmish Lodge, but that hardly counts. And anyway, there are significantly fewer Yarmish folk living there since the Empire became a signatory to the Liberty Pact. With that in mind, and marking the increased prestige of the Imperial Consul, a respected merchant prince, Benjamin de Tassato Rigario of the Featherwick Guild, publishers of one of the city's better-regarded broadsheets, has come forward with a proposal. One of the things the Featherwick Guild has identified is that the office of Imperial Consul lacks gravitas. Each of the ambassadors is responsible for an embassy, but the Imperial Consul is not. They have no offices, precious few staff, no address from which to discharge their responsibilities. All of this contributes to the lack of respect that the consul experiences when dealing with foreign powers. The fact that Tassato has no significant embassies within its bounds makes it ideal for addressing this issue. If the Senate wants foreigners to take the Imperial Consul more seriously, argues Prince Benjamin, they should arrange for an Imperial Consulate to be built. An Imperial Consulate could be built in Tassato Rigario, providing several benefits for the Imperial Consul. The commission would cost a Senate motion, 25 wains of weirwood, 15 wains of white granite, and 80 crowns in labour costs. It so happens that the Featherwick Guild has the perfect site in mind, a stone's throw from the University of Tassato in Rigario. It is a 4-storey building that belonged to Prince Benjamin's great-aunt. Following her death, she very intentionally died without disposing of the premises. A decades-long fight between her relatives over who would take custody of the prime real estate erupted. Now everyone who might have had a claim on the building is either dead or has moved to the country to get away from their relatives. The building is falling apart. Nobody has made any effort to maintain it in 30 years. Indeed, the place is becoming reasonably dangerous to passers-by and is likely to fall down within the next few years. The Senate could declare the building derelict and refurbish it as the Imperial Consulate. It stands on the eastern banks of the Vassa and was built to incorporate a small private dock that would make it ideal for meeting with dignitaries from foreign nations, if it was expanded slightly. The building foundations are good, and the lower levels sturdy enough. It could provide an ideal residence for the consul, as well as rooms for a dozen staff, a staff hand-picked by the civil service from some of the finest diplomatic minds in Tassato. Establishing the Imperial Consul would require 25 wains of weirwood and 15 wains of white granite to repair the building and expand the docks, as well as 80 crowns in labour costs. Work would take 3 months, and it would require a Senate motion to commission. It would also count against the Senate's limited number of commissions for the season when it was built. It would have an upkeep for 5 thrones each season, just like any other embassy. The benefits to the Imperial Consul, who would be given custody of the building, as it commissioned of course, would be fourfold. First, they would have finely appointed apartments in the finest city in the Empire that would be for their exclusive use. It is easy to underestimate the benefits of such arrangements, but they are important, especially when dealing with foreign powers. It is difficult for the consul to impress visitors with the power and commitment of the Empire without the accoutrements of state to dignify that. Secondly, with the establishment of the consulate and the provision of offices for a support staff chosen from the diplomatic corps and the most articulate graduates of Tassato University, The Imperial Consul would be able to receive a regular briefing on the Empire's diplomatic status. The briefing would, in theory, contain any information about the various barbarian and foreign nations the Empire did not have an existing ambassador to deal with, but it would also contain rough overviews of the relationship between the Empire and the nations they did have an embassy with. While not as in-depth as the briefings received by individual ambassadors, it would certainly help the consul discharge their duties as a liaison between the ambassadors and the Senate. Thirdly, while the consul has no legal authority to deal with Axos, the Commonwealth, and the others, most foreign nations understand there is more to politics than dealing with an ambassador. As such, the consul would gain a unique version of the mercantile support benefit that ambassadors enjoy. Merchants, and those seeking favour from every foreign nation with which the Empire has established an embassy, would send representatives to Tasato to visit the consulate. This would create a series of ministries that would allow the ambassador to acquire trade goods from those merchants at a reasonable price. They would not be on the same scale as the ministries enjoyed by specific ambassadors, but the consul would have many more of them to choose from. Fourth, and finally, the existence of a consulate would cement the consul's prestige and status in the Empire. As such, all those people who regularly discount the imperial consul would begin to take the title seriously, dealing with them just as a foreign nation would deal with an ambassador. The imperial consul could be given the ability to appoint the Empire's ambassadors. The Featherwick Guild have spent nearly a century observing imperial politics and writing about what they have seen. One of the things they have seen recently is that the Senate sometimes struggles with the need to appoint the 9 ambassadors it has created over the last few years. The process is described by Prince Benjamin as clunky. A lifelong devotee of the virtue of wisdom, he has a proposal for the Senate. Right now, it requires a Senate motion to propose an ambassadorial title be appointed, even though everyone knows the ambassador's term is coming to an end. Then the actual appointment takes place in the next Senate session. Benjamin's proposal is that the Senate amend the powers of the imperial consul to allow them to appoint the ambassadors by announcement. The Senate would continue to appoint the consul, and Benjamin is under no illusion that they would need to choose their candidates for such a powerful post very carefully. But it would free the senators from the constant cycle of appointment in which they are currently trapped. As with historical research, in an emergency, or if the consul was not in a position to appoint an ambassador, a senator could still raise the motion to do so via the existing method. This is somewhat similar to the proposal Jeroboam of Sanctuary made in autumn last year, that ambassadors should be appointed by the General Assembly, but it represents a significantly smaller transfer of power from the Senate to a Senate-appointed position. As such, Prince Benjamin and his supporters do not believe it would constitute a constitutional vote. Obviously, the Imperial Fleet Master would remain a military appointment and not something for the consul to worry about, unless the Senate changed that separately. But Prince Benjamin doesn't really count the Fleet Master as a proper ambassador, whatever the Grendel may say. If the Senate chose to pursue this path, they could combine the amendment to the consul's powers with the same motion required to commission the consulate. The opportunity to establish the imperial consulate remains available until the end of the spring equinox 384. There is no time limit on the suggestion that the imperial consul might appoint the imperial ambassadors. A statement of principle during the summer solstice suggested that Seren might become the 5th city of the League. During the summer solstice, Alfredo Barrosa presented a statement of principle before the League National Assembly that encouraged the city of Seren to secede from the Navarre nation and become the 5th city of the League. Having achieved a greater majority, the statement was duly circulated amongst the priests of the 4 cities. Inevitably, word of Alfredo's words reached the people of Seren themselves. The statement has received a mixed reception, to put it mildly. It is not clear what the author of the judgment intended, but some, both in the League and amongst the Navarre, are concerned that it is nothing more than a mockery of Seren's ambitions. As the bitter pundit Rufio Telemska de Maistre wrote in his regular newspaper column, "We expect better of our bishops, even ill-bred Regarian bishops, than to demean the ambition and pride of our fellow imperial citizens." Others, however, have chosen to take the statement at face value, and a series of heated discussions have broken out in various salons and coffee shops across the cities. Nowhere has this debate been more heated than in Tasato. The western city shares a border with Miaren, and Navarre traders and merchants are a common sight on both sides of the river. A lecture at the School of Epistemology about historical efforts to encourage other cities to join the League, some of them reaching as far back as the original formation of the nation, when both Siroc and Mead were allegedly invited to join Aldona's ambitious endeavour. These discussions have widened to include the entire topic of other cities joining the League. The problem, as Tasatan pundits on both sides of the river agree, is that it is not enough for a city to join the League. There are a number of limitations placed on large settlements by the requirement for food and water, among other things. For Seren or Mead or Siroc or Kalpaheim to join the League, the entire territory of Miaren or Mitwold or Madruga or Hanmark would need to secede. This is simply inconceivable. Even more inconceivable is the idea that any of these cities, each a keystone of the culture to which they belong, may see that they had more in common with the League than with their own nations. The example of Temeshwar is raised several times, but most historians agree that the northernmost of the League cities had already grown far from its Varushkan roots long before the formation of the League. One need merely look to the example of Empress Giselle and her ill-fated efforts to convince the aldermen and Domiro of Mead and Siroc to join the League, and how disastrously that turned out for her. To see the folly of trying to steal cities just because they are cities. A Navarre city would never prosper in the League, because at its heart it would still be Navarre. That is not to say that if the people of Siroc did eventually decide they had more in common with their League cousins to the north and south, that the League would turn them away. Far from it. But that desire to join the League would need to come from within, and would need to be so widespread that the entire territory chose to leave their former nation and become citizens of the League, something that could never be forced even with the new Senate power relinquishment. As the early Sarvosan philosopher Izzet Benedictus Saravos said after her visit to the White City, "It is not stone that makes a city, but people." As the discussions began to die down, however, there are some positive suggestions made in the light of the Barossa statement. Both come from the people of Tasato, possibly because the people of Temeshwar, Sarvos and Holberg have their own concerns at the moment, more pressing than questions of Navarre cities. The towns of Tagliona and Holt would be excellent places for markets to improve trade between Tasato and Seren. Construction would require 50 wains of weirwood, 30 wains of white granite, 160 crowns, and would take 6 months. Benefits would be felt by businesses in Tasato and forests in Miaren. The town of Tagliona stands square on the road from Tasato to Seren. Much of its wealth comes from supplying wood to builders and boatwrights. Since the blood-red roads were established, it has also provided a popular place for Navarre merchants and traders to visit. Many of the inns there are operated by the Woodward Road Guild under the guidance of merchant prince Olivia Tagliasta von Tasato, and it is she that has put forward a proposal to the Tasato Chamber of Commerce and to the Navarre merchants who regularly visit Tagliona. If the Navarre are to realize their grand vision of elevating Seren to the ranks of the great cities of the Empire, then it behooves the people of the most ambitious and proud city of the League to support that endeavour, especially as it presents an opportunity for profit. What she proposes is that the people of Tasato expand the warehouses at Tagliona and establish a market specifically aimed towards increasing the flow of Navarre lumber into Tasato. At the same time, the Navarre would build markets and warehouses of their own, but in southern Mearan. Building anything requires a number of factors to fall into alignment, she quips, chief among them of which is a shitload of money. The people of Tesato have that money. The project would require 50 wains of weirwood, 30 wains of white granite, 160 crowns in labour costs, and take 6 months to complete. It could be established with either a Senate motion or an imperial way leave. The market would function as not one but 2 great works, one centred in Tagliona and the other in Holt in Mearan. While both were operational, every business in Tesato would receive a seasonal share of 60 measures of forest resources: iridescent gloaming, dragonbone, ambergelt, and beggar's lie, none of which are particularly common in the markets of Tesato. At the same time, the forest owners of Mearan would share a seasonal bounty of 54 crowns, money they could potentially use to acquire the resources needed to complete one of the ambitious projects proposed to transform Seren. Even after Seren's transformation were complete, these markets would continue to bring added prosperity to the 2 neighbouring cities, and hopefully cement stronger ties of friendship between the 2 people. A mutual association in the hills east of Tesato could benefit both the League and the Navarre. Construction would cost 15 wains of mithril, 10 wains of weirwood, 50 crowns, and take 3 months. 2 imperial titles would be created, a League title overseeing a herb ministry, and a Navarre title overseeing a metal ministry. The guild that own most of the mines in the hills above Tesato Mestra are old, traditional, and a little set in their ways. As a consequence, it comes as something of a surprise when a week after the Woodward Road Guild lays out its proposals for Tagliona, the Forge and Furnace Fellowship throws its own hat, metaphorically, into the ring. The ancient merchant prince Cassandre de Mestra recently passed away, and has been succeeded by the significantly younger and more ambitious Gemma Stewart of Tesato. A second-generation orphan child of Mournwald refugees, Gemma is something of a success story in Tesato, working her way up from a house of the Little Mother through the mines to secure a place as the prince of one of the richest mining guilds in the city. Since she took her place in Tesatan politics, Gemma has publicly committed herself to changing the fortunes of Tesato and tapping into the rich veins of ore she is convinced still lie beneath the hills above the city. Her proposal is for a mutual association formed by 5 of the mining guilds, and working in conjunction with the apothecaries of Seren to the enrichment of both cities. Seren has few mines, but it has an abundance of herbalists and healers of all types. Mining is dangerous work, and despite the efforts of the apothecary clearinghouse, there is still a significant need for healing herbs on both sides of the river. Her plan involves building a trading post, an inn, warehouses and residences at the base of the hills in western Madeiras. The mining guilds, led by the Forge and Furnace Fellowship, of course, would divert ore directly from the mines to the trading post for sale to Navarre merchants prepared to travel the extra miles from Tagliona. Half the buildings would be given over to the Navarre, who would use them to sell herbs to the Tesatan mining guilds at a reasonable price. Gemma's proposal would require 15 wains of mithril to lay tracks to transport the ore, 10 wains of weirwood, and the labour cost would be 50 crowns, and it would take 3 months to complete construction. It could be commissioned with either a Senate motion or an imperial way leave. Once complete, it would create not 1 but 2 imperial titles. One would be appointed by business owners of the League, perhaps called something like Representative of the Maestrin Hills Association, while the other would be appointed by the herb garden owners of Navarre, possibly Represented of the Mearan Herbalist Fellowships. Both would be annual boss titles, and each would control a ministry. If any decisions needed to be made about the Madeiras Mutual Association, they would need to make them together, unanimous decisions of both the League and the Navarre title holders. Both the road to Serran and the Matron Hills Mutual Association opportunities will remain available until at least the end of the Winter Solstice 383. After that, it is likely that the impetus of the original statement will have faded along with interest in these commissions. There are still a number of marchers living in Tasato. Ever since the decision of the Tasato Chamber of Commerce to accept the refugees from Whittle in their city during the winter solstice of 380, there have been an enclave of folk from the marches living in Tasato Maestra. Originally made up solely of villagers from Whittle who had been forced from their homes by the Jotun advance, it is now the home of a thriving number of marcher folk. While the bulk are from the Mournwold, there are people settled in Little Mournwold from as far afield as Breggersland and Upwold. They are a hard-working people in the main, always happy to do a good day's work for a good day's wage. Most stay for only a few months at a time, returning to their homes in the west after they have made enough money or grown bored of the city. Others, however, stay. They settle down with Tasartan partners. They find that they enjoy working in a guild more than they enjoyed working on a farm or in a mine. They come to realize that there is only a fine gradation of difference between their lives back home and their lives in the big city. By inches, they slowly become Tasartans. In turn, they bring marcher food, marcher festivals, and marcher ideas to the people of Tasato. This is actually nothing new. Over the centuries there have been periods where immigration from the marches into Tasato has waxed and waned, and for the most part the city has been made the stronger for it. Right now, however, the people of Little Mournwold are having troubles of their own. After years of trying to find a peaceful resolution to the problem posed by the people of Whittle, the Marcher Assembly has had enough. They have issued a statement of principle giving the Whittle folk an ultimatum: reject their hateful practices or face the consequences. For many of the former Whittle folk living in Tasato, this is less about the spiritual practices and more about the Whittle folk's refusal to accept that orcs can be their neighbours. Some of the other Marcher immigrants are conflicted. The Whittle folk are proud and stubborn, but they shed blood to free the Mournwold from the Jotun. Surely there must be another way. Merchant Prince Mariana von Maestra of the Wild River Crossing Guild works closely with many Marcher folk living in Little Mournwold. She has been impressed with their work ethic and their no-nonsense attitude, and listening to them grumble about the plight of the Whittle folk, she has come up with a possible solution, one that she openly admits will prove very controversial. During their stay in Tasato, the people of Whittle kept pretty much to themselves. They worked hard, they did not spread hateful teachings, they didn't cause any trouble for anyone. Their dislike of orcs is unfortunate, but also understandable. The problem, she argues, is not entirely of the making of the Whittle folk. Perhaps the famously articulate people of Tasato could reach out to the Whittle folk, not to force them to abandon their traditions, but to offer them a home where they would not be required to accept orcs as their neighbours. Synod Mandate, League National Assembly. The people of Whittle are not evil, they are misguided. Their hatred of orcs is founded on decades of fighting the Jotun and not just their faith. Their embrace of hatred is no more problematic for civilized folk than the false idols of the Assaveans. As such, the League Assembly sends a priest with 50 doses of liao to offer the Whittle folk sanctuary in Tasato, in the Little Mournwold district they helped to found. While the people of Tasato accept orcs as citizens of the Empire, there are no orcs vying to become citizens of the League, and so the Whittle folk may live peacefully in Tasato Maestra without compromising their beliefs, as long as they accept that preaching the false virtue of hatred will not be tolerated. If the League Assembly passes this mandate, and it will require a greater majority thanks to the intervention of the Wisdom Assembly and the Sword Scholars, then some of the Whittle folk who sought sanctuary in Tasato in the past will do so again. Not everyone will heed the invitation to sanctuary, but the young and the old and the least dedicated amongst them would accept the fact that their time in the Mournwold was over. They would return to their residences in Little Molemold with their families. Some would remain behind, of course, the dyed-in-the-wool fanatics who preferred a martyr's death to a possible compromise, but many would be saved. This option is not without consequences. The Whittle folk would lose access to the fine-quality mine that they operate beneath Whittle Hill. The green iron paid each season to the Tasato Chamber of Commerce would dry up, but given that if the Whittle folk are arrested there would be little chance of the green iron continuing to flow, this seems like a minor price. Indeed, Prince Mariana has suggested that once the Whittle folk were settled, they could be encouraged to turn their expertise loose on some of the old mine workings above Tasato Mestra, potentially improving the prosperity of their league neighbours in a different way. Obviously, the mandate would also entail accepting known heretics into the league, but Merchant Prince Mariana is adamant that these people are misguided and not evil. Her argument is that away from the orcs they hate, there would be plenty of opportunity to slowly wean them away from their spiritual crutch and help them embrace the ways of the League. As long as the League does not attempt to assimilate orcs before the Whittle folk have been convinced to put aside their hatred, optimistically this will take at least 30 years or so, then there should be little chance of a recurrence of the problems they are currently causing in the marches. There has been an incident in the quarries of Ontario. A week before the autumn equinox, there is a rumour of an incident in the quarries of the Arat and Gamble. Details are sketchy, but some of the more excitable gossips are already pushing the belief that this is absolutely the work of the Fellowship of the Red and Gold Mask, who obviously must be trying to work to remove the highborn holder of the seat, Armies of Rykos. The Fellowship is a shadowy, secret society that may well not exist outside the pages of lurid novels and melodramatic plays. Allegedly, they are a cultish cabal made up of members of prominent guilds from both Tasato Mestra and Tasato Regario, created by a crazed desire to punish any outsider who meddles in the feud between Regario and Mestra. In this case, by taking a boss seat they imagine should remain in the hands of the League alone. Stories are confused. There is breathless talk of murder and sabotage, as well as claims of open rioting amongst the workers there, which are likely an exaggeration. The egregores of the League, and presumably the seat of the Arat and Gamble, will have more information on what actually occurred with the valuable white granite seat in the upcoming summit.